great. Go ahead and start that recording. We will take questions, so please do feel free to plug your questions into the chat, and then we're going to leave plenty of time at the end to address any of the questions that have come up, and plan to have a discussion toward the end for our community. So let's see, I'm going to go ahead and move my windows around so I can see the Zoom window a little better. Okay, great. All right, everybody. Well, welcome. I'm Jill Morris. I'm the Executive Director of PALC, and I'm currently the Project Director of the CC Plus Initiative, which stands for Consortia Collaborating on a Platform for Library Usage Statistics. And we do have a website now, which we'll point you to toward the end, that has a little bit more information and background on this project as well. I'm joined by co-presenters here today, Anna Osterman and Gretchen Gigan, who will introduce themselves in just a few moments at their parts of the presentation. So we're thrilled to see all of you here today. Gretchen, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just a little bit of background and context for this project. Obviously, you all here are very familiar with electronic resource usage statistics and why we might be interested in them. But there was a realization a few years back that we were all spending a lot of effort on the same types of activities in terms of trying to gather electronic usage statistics and then process them into something that we could use and something that would be meaningful. Clearly, we all spend millions of dollars on these e-resources, and there are standards-based reports out there available from counter formats that we wanted to be able to use more effectively. And many of us were involved in conversations with Counter and making sure that the reports were reflecting what we needed, but we didn't all have a set of tools that we could share to help ease the process of actually getting those data. So we kind of came to this point back in, I don't know, 2013, 2014, where we recognized that we should perhaps address this challenge together rather than coming up with a lot of independent solutions. And in 2014, there was a small group of us within the ICOLC community that put a survey out to members, and about 45 different organizations internationally responded. And there was a really clear demonstrated need that we needed to be able to collaborate on usage statistics to help solve problems together around the amount of time and energy and resources it took to gather up those materials. So that sort of gave us our starting point. I think we were at a Charleston conference in 2014 when that sort of first came to a head. And from that point on, we developed out a project from within the consortial community to try and develop some solutions that we could use together. So Gretchen, if you would go to the next slide, please. So we came together around a couple of key goals, and fairly simple here, but the first was really to increase our ability to analyze our stats. We really wanted to be able to do this at scale, which there were no solutions at the time that offered the scale that many of us were looking for. And we felt it was really important for us to be able to address this together. The second was really around creating the staff and cost efficiencies that many of us needed. We recognized that it was a really resource-intensive undertaking to try and analyze e-resource statistics. And it was made more difficult, because we were all doing it a little bit differently, but many of us using homegrown tools and some of us in a hodgepodge of approaches that clearly came out of that survey. And so we thought we could make a big difference here with this project by really making one of our goals to create those staff and cost efficiencies. And then thirdly, we were hoping to empower consortia and libraries to make informed decisions about their investments. And this is, of course, probably the most important one in terms of being able to make an impact over the long term. We wanted to be better stewards of our funds, to be able to provide information about our investments back to our member institutions, as well as use it for negotiation purposes as we go out and acquire electronic resources. So we started off with those three goals. And go ahead, go to the next slide, please. And what ended up happening was we developed first an initial project that was aimed at developing a prototype to try and understand what it would take to approach this together, to develop some governance structures, as well as a prototype technology that would allow us to do that. And we won a $50,000 National Leadership Grant for libraries from IMLS that really focused on harvesting and displaying Counter 4 stats. Later, after that project completed, we applied for another round of funding, this time a much bigger grant, in order to cover some initial development of software that we would use from that point on. And we were awarded $247,000 thereabouts in order to support that development effort on behalf of about 10 consortia who partnered together to develop out this project. PALC, my institution, is the fiscal agent for the grant. However, this project is a very collaborative effort. It's international in scope. We've got a great list of partners involved in this. And it really was, that application, I think, was successful because of so many letters of support from within this community. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot of those who are involved so far and on our advisory board and various teams. You can see there the list of individuals that are engaged in the conversation. And we've been really lucky to just have a wonderful group of individuals and great consortia partners on this project. So big shout out and thank you to all of the participants on this list. In addition to the steering committee or the advisory board that sort of helps us to direct the project, we have a product management team. And that is a group of individuals that have a good deal of expertise in the actual use of usage statistics and who have really helped us to scope our requirements and prioritize features and development efforts. So that's been a huge boon to the project as well. And of course, Gretchen Giggin was hired on as our project coordinator. She's now full-time staff at PALC as a project manager, our digital projects manager here. And she's been leading the bulk of this effort to make sure that the project keeps moving forward. So up next, I'm going to toss it over to Gretchen. She's going to be able to tell you a bit about what's happening in CC+, what it is, what it's going to become, and then later on we'll pass it to Anne, who will talk a bit about sort of next steps. So Gretchen, I'm going to pass it to you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Gretchen Giggin. I'm a digital projects manager at PALC. Yeah, what is CC+? We've talked about a lot of really broad ideas so far, but what have we actually created? So CC+ is a web-based application that harvests Counter 5 reports using the Sushi protocol. And then it puts those reports into a database and it combines multiple reports from multiple providers and multiple institutions into the same central database so that you can then create customized reports out of it. So you are not limited to the views that Counter has kind of preset with Counter 5. You're not limited to just getting data from one provider and one institution at a time. You can really put them all together. And in some degree, this is to kind of address the lack of the consortium report in the Counter 5 standard, but it provides lots of other benefits as well that I hope we'll be showing you today. Oops. Here we go. Okay, so now I'm going to do an actual demo of what we have working at the moment. So that is not the one I wanted to pull up. Pardon me. Too many windows. Okay, so this is what the application currently looks like if you log in as a consortia administrator. So I have access to multiple institutions. So CC+ operates by combining users, providers, and institutions. And I'm going to increase the size of the font here so it's a little bit easier to see. So we have users in the system, providers, and institutions. And all three of these can be created one at a time, but you can also upload a particularly structured spreadsheet and you can export it out with the credentials that you want. So if you're doing this on behalf of a consortium, you can upload all of your institutions at once. You don't have to create separate accounts for each. So here's a look at one of the institutions. And this includes some basic details to help you kind of characterize your institutions. You can also combine them into different groups, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And you can create user accounts for users within that institution. So you can actually share access to the data in CC Plus with some of your members. I'll go through that in a second as well. Down here, you can see all of the providers that I've connected to for this institution. And it's really easy to connect a provider. You just have to add what you have as the either customer ID, requester ID, API key, whatever that provider requires. And you can set up a connection, and it will immediately set up a automated job every month to go out and harvest the latest month's data from that provider. So all you have to do is create the connection between these two things, the institution and the provider, and it's automatically set up to start harvesting data every month. Once that connection is there, though, I can always go back and edit it if there's a change to the credentials. If there's a change to the endpoint at the provider level, I can change that as well. So I can keep this up to date, and I can share the management of this with my institution if I'd like to. You don't have to. So you can also harvest reports manually. So it would be kind of common practice once you set it up and you add your institutions and your providers to want to go back and gather all the data from the last year or something like that, so that you have some preloaded into the system. So you can set it up to go out and harvest what you need when you need it, or you can rely on the monthly routine harvesting from that point forward. So logs of those harvests are available for you to review so that you can keep up on track with what has been harvested into the system. You could also see that, I think, if you remember from that settings page, I can see all of the reports that have been gathered for that particular combination of institution and provider. As you probably know, with harvesting counter reports, there are often a lot of delays and sometimes problems, both with our credentials and with the endpoint. So CC Plus is actually set up to make up to 10 attempts to harvest a report. So you can see here, this one I had to actually go through 10 times, this one only 4. So let's take a look at one of these. I can see the details of each attempt to harvest a single report. So in this case, this tried 3 times before I realized that there was an error in the URL for the provider. So once I fixed it on its next routine attempt to harvest the record, it was able to harvest it and add it to the database. So this does have some built-in support for being able to deal with the kind of frequent delays that you might experience when providers don't have data ready exactly when they say they're going to. If the 10 retries do actually fail and you can't connect, an alert is created. So this lets us know all of our harvests that have sort of completely failed for some reason. And we can go in and try and figure out what the problem is and if we can fix it. So we can see what the errors are here, and we can determine if this is something that is on the provider's end or is something that we have some control over. And these are also displayed on the home page. So whenever you log in, you'll be able to see if any new reports have failed that you need to follow up on. And once you check these, you can clear them out so that they won't show up there anymore. Sorry, I'm just looking in my notes to see where I need to be. Oh yeah, one other thing before we move on to see the reports is just that you can download the actual JSON data that is shared with you. JSON is just a serialization format for data, and that's what Counter is actually sending in that request. So you can actually download the individual report if you want to go back and look at the source. But the real power with CC Plus is to actually create that customized report that you wanted to see. So I can limit this to particular institutions within my consortium. I can get data for all the institutions in the consortia, or as I said, I can set up predefined groups. So if I want to group together, you know, all of my institutions that are academic libraries versus public libraries, or whatever else. And then I can also harvest data for all of the providers that I have for this particular institution, or I can limit it to one or more. For the sake of this demo, so that it goes quickly, I'm just going to use one provider. And then I choose the kind of report I want. If you're familiar with Counter's new standards, instead of providing several different reports, they really only provide one master report, and then you can make requests for specific what they call views, which are basically pared down or filtered versions of the master report. So what we do is gather the master report every month, and then when you want to see data, you can choose one of the predefined views that Counter has set up. Or what I'm going to do is actually create a custom report just for myself. And then I can determine if I want just this month's data, if I want data from the last year, or if I want to set up a custom request for just a particular period that I want. So I'm going to go for the latest month. And before I get a preview of the data, it will give me some more options that I can use to customize what I want to see. So these are all of the columns that will be represented in the report that I'm going to generate. So I'm going to decide that I want to see the institutions because I've got more than one institution in there. And I want to see the publisher and the platform, but I don't want to see any of the investigations. I just want to see the requests. When I hit preview, I'll get a preview of the first 100 rows of the data so that I can check it and I can say, oh, this is what I want, or this isn't what I want. And I can also filter based on the data that is in the reports itself using these filters. So I'm going to decide just to see, maybe I want to just see the OA content. So when I refresh, you can see that I'm only seeing the OA values here. If I decide to add another column, it will create a column for it. And when I refresh the preview, I'll see that filled in. So once I've got this set up exactly the way I want, I have the option to export it out as CSV data. And then with that CSV spreadsheet, I can use it in whatever other applications you use to crunch your data. But I can also save this particular configuration. So this particular set of choices, I can save as a particular, what we're calling a configuration. So sorry, I wanted to say this is Group B, Project Muse, last month. And now when I save that, when I come back to the home page, with one click, I can just go right back to that report. And if I do this in another month's time, it will be, it will actually get me the last month's data, not the month that I created the configuration in. So you can set up basically shortcuts. If you're pulling the same data every 4 months and, you know, every time you go back in and you have to remember, oh, how did I do this? How did I do that? You can set yourself up a custom link and just go directly to the report that you want. One other thing I forgot to mention, the default is to provide data in this, what we kind of refer to as a compact CC+ format. So you have basically one line per journal or book or whatever it is, and per set of institutions, and then all of your metrics in different columns. So as you can see, I've got 3 entries for this Journal 18, but that's because I've got it for a couple of different configurations. If you would rather see the data in the traditional Counter format, we can do that as well. And so what that does is it gives you each metric on a different line. So you can see, instead of seeing total item requests, unique item requests across the top, I've got each in a separate row. So you can get the data in whichever format makes the most sense for you to actually be able to work with it. The last thing I want to show is actually in a different window. So in this window, I've actually logged in as a member of one of the institutions. So the institution we've been working with, State University, I actually have created an account as a manager just of State University. So I'm a member of your consortium, and I can use this tool to log in and just see my own institution's data. When I come to the harvest log, I see just my own institution's log of activity. And when I create a report, I don't even get the option to choose another institution. So I can create reports for myself of just my institution's data as just a byproduct of you using CC Plus for your own uses. You can also, as I think I mentioned briefly earlier, you can set them up to have the ability to update these credentials as they change, or to add a connection to another existing provider that you may not have set up for them. So if you want to, you could set this up as a service for your members to actually add in more of their own subscriptions and get data for them themselves outside of what you as a consortia work on together. But you can also set it up so that they just have read access and they can't actually change any of those settings. So it's totally up to you how you want to work with it. So I think that is it. Yes, that's it for my demo. So I'm going to go back to our slides, and I just have a few other things that I'm going to touch on. So we've already gone through one pilot phase with this tool. We had 3 consortia from North America who had 5 individual libraries also participating as those manager users. And we had 3 European consortia in the group. We had 1 centrally hosted instance of CC Plus and made partitions for each consortia. And that allowed us to control like bug fixes and, you know, any kind of technology problem wouldn't be an impediment. We did 2 cycles of piloting with those users, and we released new features in that second cycle. So we had them, you know, looking at some different things in a second 6 weeks. And we got feedback through, you know, feedback surveys and bug reportings and emails and just conversations. The goals of that pilot were just to determine that the basic functionality that we built worked. We found issues that we might encounter in hosting the software. We got some information on what reports and what features were the most used so that we could use that for future planning. And we got a lot of feedback on things, features and UX things that we can work on in future phases to make it easier to use. So our outcome of that was that we did find that the core function worked, and we were able to fix a bunch of crucial bugs that we hadn't noticed through the development. We got a lot of feedback on the UX, and we were able to establish a lot of knowledge about what kind of help and documentation and what kind of community support needs we might have to use a tool like this. It is just inherently complex. But it was not a test at scale. So we did not test this with, you know, even, you know, the size of numbers of institutions we had at PALC. We did find that numerous difficulties that we had arose not necessarily with the software, but with inconsistency from the vendors in terms of what they're supplying, whether they're supplying standard data, whether they're providing that data on time and correctly. So we're going to do a second pilot in the spring, and that is going to be after we make some significant improvements to the user interface based on the feedback. And for the second pilot, we're hoping to get a small group of just 5 to 8 users, and we're going to ask them to work together on some kind of shared research problem. So we still need to work out some of the parameters if we're going to be all using the same data, if we're going to be comparing data across our institutions. But what the emphasis will be with that group will be on documenting and creating standard practices around using CC Plus and continuing to get, you know, more information on what works and what doesn't around the software. So we've recognized that there needs to be probably some good. It will be beneficial to have some more community support around the tool. And we'll also be hopefully as an outcome creating kind of structures or consistent ways to provide feedback to vendors. If we're all using the same system, then we can unified ask for the same thing from them. And we'll be identifying where it can be improved for scale and interoperability. And we're hoping that some of the piloters will actually install the software locally and give us some feedback on that. So I think I'm handing off to Anne at this point.
Thank you, Gretchen. So as with, I'm sure, all software projects, you have infinite opportunities that pop up as you go along for future development. Some of the areas that have been highlighted as particularly important for CC+ have included data visualization to aid interpretation. As Jill mentioned, this is really key to put this into practice and make it deeply useful to libraries and consortia. There's a web-hosted version for kind of quick data report generation that doesn't hold the data there. This would be similar to what Counter has planned as a solution for consortia. Integrating data from external sources such as knowledge bases, maybe GeoKB or others, would be important for isolating what is paid for by consortia, what is paid for by libraries, and other uses there. Incorporating non-release 5 data and non-counter data. So this could either be some of those are the vendor-specific data, or possibly a translation tool to bring release 4 up to release 5 and make it more comparable. And finally, maybe an API to make data within the CC+ database available to other services. This might be a way to really enrich kind of that broader library system experience. And next slide, please. So the project is still in the second IMLS National Leadership Grant awarded to the CC+ group. It was scheduled to conclude this fall, but the team has requested an extension to next June, and this was accepted by IMLS. So as Gretchen mentioned, there are a number of user interface improvements. This could be making error messages and system alerts more informative. Also some attention to how to manage the harvest in batches. And then also there will be the opportunity for that second pilot, which is really important for the software and making sure it's really working the way that it should. CC+ has also applied for a third round of IMLS National Leadership Grant funding. And this time it would be led by ICOLC. The proposed project would focus on some of the potential areas of future development mentioned previously, such as building an API framework that will leverage and really integrate the data gathered by CC+ with external tools. And if invited to submit a full proposal, there'll be a March 31st deadline. So you can imagine we'll be asking for letters of support again, because that was really critical to the success of the project. Next slide, please. So I can't say enough good things about the really excellent work on this project led by Jill, Scott, Gretchen, Sarah, many others at PALC and far beyond. I mean, really building an open source software that's intended for really broad international use is a huge undertaking. And they've gone above and beyond to create a product that fits the goals of the project and also gives attention to that future sustainability of the project. I really want to thank them for their incredible effort and say that is really exciting that CC+ has this major milestone as it's time for a broad release of the code and a really operational pilot. So although it's clear that PALC's leadership made all of this possible, and we have excellent leadership in place with ICOLC going forward, I see some folks on the call here for them. It really is also clear that partnership is central to CC+ both now and into the future. So the partner consortia who helped form this initiative have been critical. And code developed by Bernd Overnap for the counter validation tool was really helpful to the project. Future collaboration there makes so much sense for all of us. And I think they've been doing bi-weekly meetings for some time now with Counter, JISC, and Consortia Manager. And that really has also been critical to advancing the project in terms of developing sustainable software code, as well as a really deep and robust community. So the benefits of CC+ go beyond the software. We have so much to gain as an international community of libraries and consortia. As Gretchen mentioned, there really is a great opportunity for efficiencies and collaboration. Every problem that you have with the publisher, someone else is having to. And the more we can have kind of a joint advocacy, the better off we'll be. Giving a common structure to that with something like CC Plus really makes that more possible. And then finally, it's both an exciting milestone for the project and the beginning of really broad work for the community. We know that this work is difficult and time consuming, but it really is also deeply important to how we run our e-resources programs in terms of renewal and selection. If we can work together on active code development and sustainable governance, we'll really be primed for taking on additional challenges. I have some good news too. The team recently heard that CC Plus was accepted into the beta tester program for Lyricus's It Takes a Village in Practice project, specifically governance and resources. So a lot of the conversations within the advisory board and others in this program have been focused on how do we make this really be long-term and important for the community, and that program really will help us get there. So I think with that, it's just an open discussion. We really want to hear what you have to say and your comments and your questions. You can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself, whatever you prefer.
I just realized that my name is the only one on here to ask questions of. So that is fine, but you can probably ask questions of all of us.
That's totally fine.
This is Alona Burdett at KYVL, and I had I lost the signal for just briefly, so I didn't hear everything about the phase 2 pilot. Do you already have those folks identified, or are you looking for folks?
We have a small group identified so far, but if you're interested, let us know. And I'd like to keep it relatively small, but I think we still have room for another person or two in the group.
I would definitely like to throw our hat in. I'll need to speak to some of the tech folks on our side who will be seeing this by recording, but absolutely very interested.
Yeah, and we can host it for you for that pilot, but as I mentioned, we do have at least one participant who wants to host themselves, and it would be great if others wanted to as well. I see there's a question in the chat about the code base. We're using the Laravel PHP framework for the development and Vue.js for the interface. And I didn't mention in the slides, but our goal is to have a release of this in the spring before that second pilot and early spring, so like January probably. So right now we're working on, as I mentioned, mostly UX kind of improvements. Some of the code was borrowed from Bernd Obernap, and so we also kind of need to get his blessing to release his parts of the code as well. So, but it should be out in the next few months.
And just as a little more information on that code base decision, we made a change as we moved from the prototype project into this current development effort to the Laravel framework, specifically because of the extensibility of that framework and the hope that we would attract some commercial developers who could eventually also help us to further develop out this code. This is an open source project. It's going to be released under an Apache 2 license. And so it will be totally open for anybody to take it and use it and even sell it. And we view that as really critical to the sustainability of this over the long haul. We need investments from other developers, contributing back to the community as well. We feel like that's a really good way to make sure that this thing doesn't languish over time and that others are able to contribute to it. So we did make that change in this project specifically for that reason, with an eye toward hopefully, continuing to partner with Counter and continuing to partner with folks like Consortia Manager and others who use this framework, and it's a standard way of coding so that we've got a stronger base to build from.
Yeah, and just to clarify or reiterate, it is open source. It'll be released under an Apache license, and it will be on GitHub. So widely available. There's a question in the chat about interest from companies like Ex Libris.
We really haven't talked to Ex Libris much about this. They know we're working on it. We've actually had some conversations started with folks in the Folio community as well, because they are doing some similar work within Folio. This particular project was really aimed at consortia to begin with the recognition that we also needed to support the individual libraries. And we felt, as we went around and looked at the options of what was available at the time, there wasn't another option that really scaled to allow consortial administrators to see what they wanted to see in addition to that individual library perspective. So we haven't talked to Ex Libris specifically about this, but we will reach out to them. And I think the Folio component is sort of interesting. There are some other projects that are happening, not around usage data specifically, although it's part of a conversation about library data more generally. I know Index Data is creating, which is a small open source development company. They're interested in developing out a library data platform project, which is again another open source software. We see there are many opportunities for collaboration in this space to help build context around the data we're gathering here on e-resource usage, and then contextualize it with other information that's coming from other sources. And so we're kind of hoping that CC Plus will ultimately be a source of data that can be fed into other more complete pictures of your data, and that in the next future phase, and this is something we wrote into our preliminary grant application with ICOLC, that we would be able to take this, really create CC Plus as one piece of that picture that you could pipe into whatever other platforms you want to be able to use this with. So we do expect to have more of those partnership conversations in the coming weeks and months, especially as we release the actual software itself.
There was a question in the chat about non-counter data. And that one is one that we have talked about and recognize that it's the potential to really be a huge can of worms in terms of what the software can do. So I feel that if we pursue that, it will probably be limited to uploading counter R5's R5 data that you're not getting through a sushi endpoint. So if you're getting it in some other kind of way, but it is conformant to the basic metrics of R4, or mapping R5, or mapping R4 data into the database structure we have for R5. I think that probably would be the limit of what we'd want to do with it as a project, because otherwise you'd get into creating completely other kinds of tools that can map data from one format to another, and that's not something that we really want to spend too much time on.
Any other questions or comments from any of the folks who are here on the call who have been on the advisory board as well? Got a number of us here today. Maybe not.
Hi, Jill. It's Jason from CRKN. I don't think I have much to say just because it's all been covered so well and impressively. But maybe if I can, I'll just thank you and Gretchen and Anne for all of the hard work, and sort of thanks in advance to ICOLC as well for sort of their stewardship going forward, because you've really driven us, I think, to accomplish this. And it's amazing to see how the proof of concept has evolved into something that's really quite functional and and useful to us going forward. So thank you if everyone will just allow me that indulgence.
Well,
Thank you, Jason.
I would also like to say thank you to CRKN. They were one of our pilot groups in the first pilot, and I didn't mention the others. They were California Digital Library, Cooperon, and now I'm going to forget who the rest of them were, but IREL in Ireland and BibSam, and I think that was it. And us at PALSI, we had some members as well. And I apologize if I've forgotten anybody else, but I believe those were the consortia that were involved.
Yeah, this has been a really nice collaborative effort that we've really enjoyed being a part of on behalf of the community. I think we've got a lot of opportunity, as Anne mentioned, for future collaboration and advocacy, quite frankly, around what we need from the various providers that are out there and providing these stats to us. So I think we're going to be calling on those of you who are here today to be a part of those conversations in future as we move forward in the development of this. And the governance piece of this has been great. I mean, just being able to call on another consortial partner to step into sort of the administration of a grant project and to be able to transfer it around within our community has been just a really wonderful experience. So we've appreciated everybody who's been involved to this point, all of the feedback and work that's gone into it. So I'll echo back Jason's thanks to everybody else, and CRK and you in particular have been great partners in all of this as well. So thank you. All right. Any other questions? Oh, and Rick is here. Hi, Rick. Great. All right. Well, I think if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and close for today. We will send around the recording to everybody so that you have it. If you're interested in being a piloter or taking the software and trying to install it in your local environment, please do get in touch with us. We really welcome those types of testers in particular because we haven't tested that yet. And we'll continue to keep this community informed as we move forward through future phases. We will be calling on you to participate and help us with letters of support and so on once we get to that point. So we really appreciate everybody being here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.